Sego Sewaguego. Hello there, all of yous. So a fellow over on Patreon asked me to talk about stuff like pre-colonial Iroquois and domestic animals, livestock, work animals, stuff like that, pets. And that's a fairly sort of simple topic, so why the heck not talk about it? So the only sort of domestic animals that people had back in the day were dogs. Domesticated as in they've been sort of selectively bred. That doesn't mean that that was the only sort of animals that people had. People also kept wild animals as livestock and pets on occasion. I'll talk about that later, but first talk about dogs to begin with. Dogs were the only thing that people used as sort of work animals back in the day. You'd have dogs for pulling sleds, dogs for pulling travois. You'd also have like hunting dogs, dogs for tracking and stuff like that. So what these dogs would have looked like is they would have looked kind of like, I don't know, that sort of wolf type build, like the long noses and the pointy ears and stuff like that. They would have had a bunch of different sizes, a bunch of different coat types and stuff like that, but the general shape would have been kind of wolf-like. The specific breeds of dogs seem to have varied from village to village. Each village would have their sort of bespoke. One feature of pre-colonial dogs, which seems pretty universal, is that they didn't bark. Every time I read explorers or stuff writing about encountering native dogs, they're always surprised that they don't bark. And that's something that I find very sort of interesting, in that sort of the dogs that we have today, they've been bred to bark. They've been selectively bred to bark. That's a trait that people designed them to have. And I find that so sort of frustrating because barking is like the worst part of dogs. Like if I could have a dog that wouldn't bark, you'd think that sort of thing would be the sort of thing people would snap up, right? They're like, dogs barking is just irritating. It's just irritating. It also sort of begs the question, if we can breed them to bark, surely we can breed them not to bark, and so on, so on, so on. Anyway, so all the varieties of pre-colonial Iroquoian dog, they're all extinct. I think most pre-contact dogs have gone extinct. I think there's like 6 varieties in existence today that have some native genes. Down in Mexico, there's the Chihuahua and then, I forget what, like, the Mexican hairless dog, which have both got some tiny percentage of native genes, 5% or something. In the States, there's the Carolina dog, which is, I forget, maybe a quarter native genes, mostly feral mostly feral European dogs. Canada's got something similar to the Carolina dog out east. I forget what the breed is though. It kind of just looks like a brownish husky. I forget what the heck it's called, but again, it's like a quarter native and mostly feral European dogs. Up north, they've got the only 2 sort of majority native breeds in existence. There's the Greenland dog, and then I forget if it's called like it might be called like the Canadian Eskimo dog or something like that. I don't know. I'm not a dog person. I don't know all the names. And those are the only 2 that are still mostly indigenous genes. So what happened to indigenous dogs is that in some cases they got bred out of existence. In some cases they just, people suffer hard times. You're not going to be preserving your dogs. If you've had your village burned down and you're on the road as a refugee, you've only got what you can carry. When the food starts running out, you're not going to be setting stuff aside for your dog. Through a combination of just out-competition by European dogs and hardship on the part of the people responsible for the dogs, pre-colonial dogs did not survive. I haven't heard of any... Oh, right, yeah. Up north, there was persecution of indigenous dogs. So the Canadian government started executing, just like culling Inuit dogs in order to make them easier to get onto reserves and stuff like that. So I haven't heard of anything like that happening south of like Inuit territory, but it's possible. I don't know. I hadn't even thought of that. That's interesting. Anyway, so people had varieties for pulling sleds and for hunting. The sled pulling varieties seem to have been like I don't know, kind of like mid-sized huskies, but probably not so shaggy, like 50 pounds, that sort of thing. The hunting dogs seem to have been small little things so that they're easier to control on a leash. When you're out bow hunting, you have to get pretty close to a deer in order to guarantee a decent shot. Bows are not very accurate beyond, I don't know, maybe 20 yards or so. Even less than that. You want a really clean, guaranteed shot. You kind of need like 20 feet. So you need to get close to a deer if you want to get a clean shot with a bow, like a guaranteed clean shot with a bow. And so you kind of want a dog that you can control. You don't want a dog that's going to barrel off through the woods and scare everything up, because this isn't like with a gun where you can get a fairly decent shot from a couple 100 yards. You need to be really close to it. So you need a dog that you can control on a leash. So hunting dogs tended to be pretty small. Again, I'd imagine the not barking would also help with that sort of stuff. And so that's that. I'm gonna just check my camera, make sure it's still going in this heat. Sweat bees are out in force today. I gotta be careful. They're kind of harmless provided you don't smush them. Like, they just want your salt. They're not interested in stinging you or anything. But it's bad sometimes when you get one in like your elbow there, and then you sort of move your arm and accidentally smush him, and then he stings you. And the stings aren't too bad. They hurt like bilio for a couple of seconds and then they go away. They're not severe like other bees. I'm just gonna let these two chill because if they're there, I know that they're not somewhere else. Anyway, talking. So what else? Okay, so dogs as meat. People also ate dogs back in the day. The European explorers are often quite revolted by this. I read one fellow who tried it and he says actually it tastes like pork. I don't think dogs were sort of bred for meat up here. I know they were down in like Aztec territory. You'd have ones that were specifically for eating that people would fatten up like pigs kind of. I haven't read of anything like that up here. What I think people would do is just sort of eat the surplus. This is an era without sort of spaying. In an era without sort of spaying, you're going to have a lot of surplus dogs. If you've just got dogs sort of roaming around semi-protected by people, you're going to have a lot of dogs going on. Now you can castrate dogs, but if you've got, let's say that you got 100 female dogs and 100 male dogs. If you castrate 99 of those male dogs, you're going to have 100 litters of puppies the next year. Vice versa is not true. Like, you need spaying if you want to control a population through that sort of measure. You'd just be producing a lot more dogs than you actually need. In sort of modern culture, you got people joking about, I don't know, throwing a pillowcase full of newborn kittens in the river or whatever just to get rid of them. There's a truth to that kind of joke because so you have to kind of deal with the excess. Otherwise, there's sort of consequences for that. So our modern day, you get cats, if an area's got too many feral cats, they start to affect like the bird populations and stuff like that. There's ecological consequences for overpopulation of these sort of domestic animals. Now, similarly with a village back in the day, you go to a walled village, you don't want the inside of it to be just crawling with hundreds and hundreds of dogs. It's going to be kind of just a nightmare. And if you got all the dogs outside of the village, yeah, a couple of them outside the village, that would be beneficial, keeping the rabbits and stuff away from your crops. But if you got too many dogs outside the village, they're going to start going further afield. They're going to start depopulating your local forest of deer and turkeys and stuff. Too many dogs becomes a problem pretty quickly. And so in an era without spaying, you'd have to deal with those dogs. You'd have really two solutions. Either you've got your dog sort of running wild, and you'd have to do frequent culling, or you'd have to have all of your dogs restrained to keep them from breeding. I can imagine the choice of solution varying from village to village. Now, if you're doing frequent culling, you kind of might as well make use of that, the product of that. Anyway, so that's sort of dogs in a nutshell. Okay, so I gotta wrap this up pretty quickly because my camera's starting to overheat. So just because dogs were the only domesticated animal doesn't mean that they were the only animal that people kept. People kept wild animals as livestock, as curiosities, or as pets. So I'm going to give some examples of all of the three. So the way that this would sort of happen is that you're out hunting. Now in the modern day we've got deer hunting season so that you don't end up killing mothers with babies by mistake. Back in the day there wasn't like a hunting season, but there was that same sort of attitude. You don't want to kill the mothers with babies because that's bad for the whole deer population as a whole. Nevertheless, sometimes you make mistakes, you get excited. In the heat of the moment you do something you regret. Oh, there's a deer, there's a deer. Oh. Okay, what do I do? Okay, he hasn't seen me, okay. Okay. Oh, let's move, I gotta go. God. You throw the spear and you get, I killed it, I got it right in the heart, it's dead, oh. And you go and investigate, and oh, there's a baby deer here. And baby deer, they don't have the sort of flight response that adult deer have. They can't run as fast, and they know that they can't run as fast. So their defense mechanism is that they just hunker down on the ground and they sort of get paralyzed, and you can walk up to them, push them over and stuff. Okay, there's a baby deer here, and it's just sitting there. And if we just leave, it's just gonna die. And maybe somebody who's a little bit less empathetic might think, ooh, 20 pounds extra free meat. But I think most normal people would think, oh, that's a shame. They feel a little bit bad about that. And so some people would, okay, you go and get the adult deer and I'll scoop this up and carry it home. You take it home, you put it in a pen to keep it away from your dogs and stuff. And you feed it table scraps and stuff. Oh, we got some extra corn mush, we'll give that to the deer and so on. Mindset is, we're going to raise it up to adulthood, and then that's one less bit of hunting that we have to do later on. Or else, this is our long-term food storage. A piece of jerky, that'll store for like a year, maybe a little bit more. A living deer, that'll store for like 10 years. So like, this is our emergency food rations right here. And every so often somebody would get attached to it. I've been feeding this deer for a couple of years now. It's my deer. When are we gonna butcher that deer you brought back? I'm sick of going, I'm feeling lazy today. Let's butcher that deer. No, it's my deer. Oh, come on, you brought it home. That's what you said you were gonna do when you brought it home. Well, I like him now, it's my deer. You're not gonna butcher my deer. Get the heck out of here. So I said livestock, curiosities, and pets. So deer maybe weren't kept very often as pets. I think the association between deer and food might have been a little bit strong. An animal that turns up as being kept by villages sort of surprisingly often is bears. I read an account by a Dutch explorer going through, I think, Onondaga territory in the 1620s. I hope this wind isn't messing with my microphone. And he described multiple villages as having a bear tied up in the center of the village. I can imagine a bear sort of going beyond just sort of emergency food rations or whatever. I can imagine a bear being sort of like a town curiosity. You got your neighbors in and they're like, is that a bear you have chained up there? Yeah, that's a bear. Pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. That is pretty cool. I wish we had a bear. And you go back home. They had a bear over there. How come we don't have a bear? Oh. They have a bear? And so on, so on, so on. There's a lot of cool factor associated with that. It's weird and it's interesting. If you want to sort of put on your crackpot anthropologist hat, you could also say it's got like religious significance or something like, I don't know, the bear is the king of the forest predators or whatever, and here we have subjugated the bear and bent him to our will and stuff like that. I don't buy that stuff. That sort of subjugating nature isn't really part of the culture, but like, I can imagine something similar going on. An animal that turns up sort of generally specifically as pets is raccoons. So raccoons back in the day, they were hunted for the fur. They're also hunted for the fat. The fat is supposed to be useful for medicine. It's got the right kind of texture, right ratio of like waxes and stuff like that. Raccoons were not really hunted for meat. The meat's not supposed to be very tasty, or at least people back then didn't really like it. Again, maybe some quality to it. I'm not sure what it is. So somebody, let's say they kill a raccoon, they notice it's got babies. Okay, we'll bring the babies back or whatever. Those babies are not going to be a very sort of tempting food source. It's not like, oh, the deer's got big. Hoo-hoo, we got some free deer hanging around. It's like, okay, we got these things. I don't really want to eat those. And so on, so on, so on. And maybe that's sort of the explanation for why these sort of became common and or popular pets. So I mentioned somebody, I forget where I read this, and I forget who the heck it was. It was one of those little islands in like New England area. Maybe it was like Nantucket kind of area. I forget who the heck it was. One of the people out there had like a domesticated variety of raccoon that would hang around the villages and eat scraps and stuff, and it was different from the wild raccoons. I forget where the heck I read that. Darn it. Okay. So somebody I read talks about how raccoons sort of played the same role in a Iroquoian village as a cat. You just have them kind of around, they catch mice and stuff and keep down your vermin population. And I think in this one might, what the heck is that book? Codex Canadensis? I forget who wrote that. He had this really generic French name, like Louis Pierre or something like that. Oh, damn it. I keep getting stuck on stuff like this. In the Codex Canadensis, it's got a bunch of illustrations of wildlife. For a picture of a raccoon, it's got the subtitle which translates savage cat. So that was the French word of the time for a raccoon. It's a savage cat. I don't know if they mean it like it's a wild cat, or if they mean like this is the Indian cat, and this is the cat of the savages, and so on, so on, so on. But I found that interesting because that sort of goes along with other observations, that illustration there. I sort of wonder at the logistics though of keeping pet raccoons, particularly in a longhouse, because raccoons are well known for their mischief and getting into things, and I would imagine they could cause a lot of trouble in a longhouse type environment. But maybe sort of the upper levels of a longhouse where you store all the food, that's also sort of functioning as a smokehouse, so it would be pretty unpleasant up there. That's one of the ways people help keep down like vermin and stuff from getting into the corn. So maybe it would be just too unpleasant up there for a raccoon to get up there and cause too much trouble. But I wonder, and I sort of wonder how much how common this actually was, because I haven't noticed it like universally, but I have noticed it here and there, people with pet raccoons. With the bear one, I've got one guy who encountered multiple villages on the same trip which had a pet bear. I haven't found anybody like that with raccoons. I've just found it mentioned now and again. The heck was that? Ugh. Man, there's a lot of mosquitoes out here. I'm just getting bit to pieces. Hello again. So this is the next day. Going through the recording, I remember a couple of other things I'd like to talk about. So what were they? Can I remember them here and now? Okay. So the trouble with recording things in multiple sessions is that you forget what you said. Because that first one I recorded, it was like a month ago at this point. It's hard to find the time for this stuff. It doesn't take a ton of time to come out and record stuff, but you just have to get all your ducks in a row, kind of. Turkeys. So, down in like the southern United States, Mexico area, turkeys were like properly domesticated. People would keep them and sort of have like self-sustaining breeding populations of turkeys going. I don't know if turkeys were ever sort of domesticated up here. but people did keep them for eggs and stuff. Again, I don't know if the sort of populations that people had were self-sustaining, if they'd ever sort of let the turkeys hatch the eggs and sort of keep them going that way, or if each turkey that people kept for eggs was captured from the wild. I don't know which way it was. I haven't seen any sort of evidence to say that they were sort of domesticated and kept, but it's not sort of a big logical leap. I wouldn't be surprised if it was either. I wouldn't be surprised if it's either way. I have no opinion on that subject, but turkeys were occasionally kept for the eggs. I suppose in keeping turkeys, you'd have to do something about their wings. Maybe pull out a bunch of feathers or something. I don't really know. Or else I suppose you could keep them in a box, but keeping birds in a box, it's more expensive. You just let your birds. With my chickens, like when I had chickens, you can just let them sort of roam around and they'll take care of most of their own food on their own, just eating bugs and stuff. You keep them in a box, you have to feed them a heck of a lot more. I think that's just about everything. So thank you for listening, and I hope you found this interesting. Toodaloo.